Operation Pastorius. The sea mist on Long Island, New York, smelled of salt and silence. It was June 13, 1942, and the American mainland, still reeling from Pearl Harbor, believed the Atlantic Ocean was its shield. They were wrong. As the clock neared 12:30 a.m., a German U-boat, U-202, silently broke the surface near Amagansett Beach. 4 men, carrying heavy canvas bags filled not with food or weapons, but with high explosives, detonators, and $175,000 in freshly printed American cash, climbed onto the sand. The men were not sailors. They were the spearhead of Hitler's most audacious sabotage plot on U.S. soil, Operation Pastorius. The training in Brandenburg. The plot was conceived by German military intelligence, Abwehr, as a direct reprisal for America joining the war. The goal was massive, synchronized sabotage designed to panic the American public and cripple its nascent war industry. The 8 saboteurs chosen were not seasoned spies. They were American citizens or former residents who had returned to Germany before the war. They possessed perfect, unaccented English and intimate knowledge of American infrastructure, having worked in factories, restaurants, and utilities. The men were trained for months at a secret Abwehr school near Berlin. They were taught how to handle explosives, use timers, detonators, and the deadly malleable plastique explosive designed to look like lumps of coal or wood. Forge documents, create believable American identification, ration books, and draft cards. Identify targets. Their primary targets included the Alcoa aluminum plants in Illinois and Tennessee, critical for aircraft production, the Hellgate power plant in New York City, which powered the entire Northeast rail grid, and the railway junctions in Newark and St. Louis. Their final instructions were clear: make maximum destruction, blend into the cities, and report back to Germany when the mission was complete. They were told they were heroes who would strike a blow for the fatherland. 2. The blunder on the beach. The 8 agents were divided into 2 teams of 4. The first team, led by George John Dash, the most sophisticated and skeptical member of the group, landed at Amagansett, Long Island. They stripped off their German U-boat uniforms and buried their German equipment, changing into civilian suits and fedoras. At about 2 a.m., the cover was broken. A lone Coast Guardsman named John Cullen was patrolling the isolated beach. In the dense fog, he spotted the figures moving nervously among the dunes. When he challenged them, one of the Germans, attempting to appear casual, approached Cullen. The exchange was tense and bizarre. "We are fishermen and we ran aground," the German stammered. Cullen noticed the sophisticated, unfamiliar uniforms and the distinct accent. No fisherman runs around in a uniform like that. Dash, seeing the situation spiral, stepped forward and pulled out a wad of cash, $260 in American bills, and shoved it into Cullen's hand, attempting a bribe that was far too large for a simple accident. "Take this, forget you ever saw us, go and have a few drinks," Dash ordered. Cullen, realizing he was dealing with something far beyond smugglers, took the money and, feigning confusion, retreated into the fog, running for his station to report the encounter. By the time the Coast Guard returned with reinforcements, the Germans had melted away, taking the Long Island Railroad toward New York City. The collapse from within. The FBI launched a desperate, discreet manhunt. However, the manhunt was not necessary. The plot was already doomed by the actions of its leader, George Dash. Dash was cynical about Nazism and terrified of the mission's implications. He saw the plot as a suicidal gesture that would only result in mass casualties and a firing squad. He decided within 48 hours of landing to surrender and betray his entire operation. The journey to betrayal. Dash traveled alone to Washington, D.C., booked a room at the Mayflower Hotel, and called the FBI headquarters. He spent an entire day trying to convince the FBI switchboard and lower-level agents that he was a Nazi saboteur. They dismissed him as a lunatic. The proof. Frustrated, Dash demanded to speak to Assistant Director D.M. Ladd. When he finally got a meeting, Dash produced the clinching proof: $82,500 in cash and the entire list of targets and plans, including the location of the German materials buried on the beach. The FBI quickly acted. Dash's information allowed them to easily track and arrest his 3 teammates in New York City. 4. The Southern Landing and Capture. Meanwhile, the second U-boat, U-584, landed its team, led by Heinrich Heinck, near Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, on June 17, 1942. They, too, buried their explosives and headed north. Within days, based on Dash's detailed map, the FBI located the Germans' buried gear at Amagansett. They then used the sophisticated travel patterns and cash disbursements Dash described to track the second team. Heinck and his men were all caught in rapid succession, 2 in Jacksonville, Florida, 1 in Cincinnati, Ohio, and the leader, Heinck, in Chicago, Illinois. By the end of June 27, 1942, just 2 weeks after the first landing, all 8 Nazi saboteurs were in FBI custody. 5. The secret trial and executive order. The subsequent legal proceedings were extraordinary and conducted in total secrecy. President Franklin Roosevelt feared that a public trial might allow the spies to claim prisoner of war status, or worse, inflame public panic about ongoing enemy infiltration. Military Commission. Roosevelt issued an unprecedented executive order subjecting the 8 men to a secret military tribunal, bypassing the civilian court system entirely. The trial was held in a guarded room in the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. The verdict. Despite the defense arguing that Dash and another man, Ernest Berger, had intended to defect, the commission found all 8 men guilty of violating the laws of war, espionage, and conspiracy. On August 8, 1942, 6 of the saboteurs were executed by electric chair in the District of Columbia Jail. George Dash and Ernest Berger, whose cooperation was deemed instrumental in cracking the plot, had their sentences commuted to life imprisonment. The legacy of Pastorius. The American public knew nothing about the arrests or the trial until after the executions were carried out. The swift, secret justice was widely praised when finally revealed, but it created a lasting controversy regarding the constitutional rights of the accused and the use of military tribunals for non-uniformed agents. Deportation. Dash and Berger were eventually pardoned by President Truman and immediately deported to Germany in 1948. Dash, hailed as a hero by the FBI, ironically was treated as a traitor in his native country and struggled to live out his days in obscurity. The Forgotten War. Operation Pastorius remains the only significant Nazi attempt to wage sabotage on the American home front. It is a potent, astonishing footnote in American history, a reminder that in the summer of 1942, the war was closer to New York City than many cared to admit, and was only averted by the alertness of a young Coast Guardsman and the disillusionment of one man.
When Meriwether Lewis and William Clark launched their expedition in 1804, the official mission was to map the Louisiana Purchase. The secret mandate from President Jefferson was far stranger and more vital. Find a direct water route to the Pacific. establish immediate diplomatic ties with potentially hostile, powerful native nations, and document over 100 new species. They were not just explorers, they were moving libraries, mobile pharmacies, and diplomatic decoys, carrying the fate of a fledgling nation on their shoulders into 8,000 miles of the unknown. 1. The scientific weaponry. The expedition, officially the Corps of Discovery, consisted of approximately 40 individuals. Its preparation was meticulous, driven by Thomas Jefferson's vision for a scientifically enlightened America. Lewis spent months in Philadelphia learning from the nation's foremost scientists, including botanists, astronomers, and doctors. The supplies carried were a testament to this scientific mission. The pharmaceutics. Lewis carried a vast, sophisticated medicine chest containing 600 doses of Dr. Rush's notorious thunderclappers, a mercury chloride-based laxative still found today in traces along the trail, used by archaeologists to track campsites, opium, laudanum, and vast quantities of quinine. The instruments. They carried a portable library, precision octants and sextants for celestial navigation, chronometers for calculating longitude, crucial for accurate mapping, and large quantities of high-quality paper and lead for detailed biological drawings. The air rifle. Lewis brought a 22-shot Austrian-made air rifle powered by compressed air. This technological marvel served as an astonishing diplomatic tool, demonstrated to awestruck Native American leaders, showcasing American technological prowess without wasting gunpowder or appearing overtly aggressive. 2. Diplomacy, the Great Father, and the trade goods. The primary danger was diplomatic failure. The expedition entered the lands of powerful nations, the Mandan, Shoshone, Blackfeet, and Nez Perce, who had complex, long-standing relationships with Spanish, French, and British traders. The diplomatic uniforms. Lewis and Clark wore elaborate, brightly colored military uniforms to convey authority. They carried specially minted Indian peace medals engraved with Jefferson's portrait, which they distributed to key chiefs as tokens of American sovereignty and friendship. The cargo of trust. Their trade goods were designed to establish trust. 4,600 sewing needles, 144 pairs of scissors, 8 brass kettles, vast quantities of colorful glass beads, especially blue, highly prized by the Shoshone, and 130 bundles of kites, pre-cut material for clothing. They explicitly avoided giving firearms to nations they deemed potentially hostile, such as the Blackfeet. 3. The hidden linchpin, Sacagawea. The Corps' greatest diplomatic tool was not a weapon or a piece of paper, but a 16-year-old Shoshone woman, Sacagawea. The cultural shield. Acquired at the Mandan villages, where she had been taken captive, Sacagawea traveled with her French-Canadian husband to Saint-Charbonneau and their infant son, Jean-Baptiste. Her presence, a woman carrying a baby, was an instantaneous visual cue of peace to every nation they encountered. Her presence immediately signaled that the group was not a war party. The interpreter and pathfinder. Her role became utterly essential when they reached her native Shoshone territory. They needed Shoshone horses to cross the Rocky Mountains, the Serpent People's land. When Sacagawea recognized the Shoshone chief, Kameawait, as her long-lost brother, the transaction for horses was immediately secured, a negotiation that saved the expedition from starvation and failure. The botanical expert. Sacagawea was also the group's critical guide to survival, identifying edible roots, berries, and plants, preventing the group from being poisoned or starved in unfamiliar territory. The scientific breakthroughs. The expedition was a triumph of biological discovery. Over the 2 years, Lewis and Clark documented 178 new plants and 122 new animal species for Western science. The animals.
They were the first Westerners to formally describe the grizzly bear, the prairie dog, which Lewis spent a day pouring water down a hole to capture one, the pronghorn antelope, and the coyote. The plants. Lewis sent thousands of seeds and specimens back east. His samples included the Osage orange, the bitterroot, and hundreds of grasses and trees crucial for developing American agriculture and pharmacology. The mapping secret. Though they failed to find the direct, commercially viable Northwest Passage, the mountains proved too vast. The maps Clark drew were of astonishing accuracy, relying on solar observations and geometric calculations. These maps remained the authoritative guide to the Western Territories for nearly 50 years. The return and the aftermath. The Corps returned in September 1806, having suffered only one death, Sergeant Charles Floyd, likely from a burst appendix, and traversing nearly 8,000 miles. Despite their hero status, the promise of the expedition was only partially fulfilled. The fading promise. The vast amounts of scientific data were not immediately published. Lewis, suffering from political pressure and likely depression, delayed the publication of the journals, leading to a decade of obscurity for their findings. Lewis's tragic end. Lewis, appointed governor of the Louisiana Territory, died under mysterious circumstances in 1809 on the Natchez Trace. Many historians suspect suicide, but the official records remain ambiguous, adding a tragic footnote to the heroism of the expedition. The journey of Lewis and Clark was not just about drawing lines on a map. It was an unprecedented mission of science, diplomacy, and survival, fundamentally shaping America's self-image as a continental power, resting on the ingenuity of its leaders and the indispensable guidance of its native allies.